What's up, Tesla family? It's Ray J back with another video. And in this one, I want to break down what's happening with Tesla, SPY, Nvda, the QQQ, and a couple of other tickers. I'm going to break down what the news is saying about Tesla and why tomorrow is going to be a very big day as we have the notorious CPI report coming out. So I'm going to talk about a bunch of data and break down what the news is saying about Tesla and the charts. But just know that I am not a financial planner. Make sure you take nothing I say as financial advice. And also, if you guys can, please check out my Moomoo link. If you deposit $100, you're guaranteed 5 free stocks. If you deposit $1,000, you're guaranteed 15 in total, not to mention 8.1% APY on invested cash. The offer ends very soon in just about 2.5 weeks. Anyways, now let's talk about what's happening with the market. So as far as Tesla goes, guys, you guys can see that right over here. Tesla has been dipping a bit, and this was very, very healthy. We're down about 6.15%, which is still nothing compared to the 40% rally we got over the last couple of trading days. So Tesla's still up a lot more than how much it's dipped, but the question now remains, will it dip even more? And this is going to be very dependent on CPI and other factors like that. That's why I want to talk about the data first before I break down more details about these levels and the charts. Let's first talk about the news, and I'll talk about all of this. So the first thing worth mentioning is the fact that there's a lot of headlines coming out about how we're essentially seeing a big shift in positions for Tesla. Short sellers are down about $7.8 billion after the 38% post-election surge in shares. On top of this, this was very, very bullish news that came out, especially as shorts are continuing to struggle. Now, right now, the shorts could be gaining a slight edge as Tesla dips a bit. However, that does not necessarily make it bright for them in the long term because Tesla will recover. Now, right now, Tesla is the third largest short stock in the stock market with basically about a $25.6 billion valuation in short interest, which is absolutely insane. The shorts are still very present, and they're part of the reason why Tesla's pumping the way it is, as we're seeing this very, very big short squeeze. Notice that the short volume for Tesla is continuing to increase, at least as volume is going up. So we're still seeing more shorts present. They're continuing to short Tesla to oblivion. Yes, they're going to have a small victory as Tesla is dipping a bit, and it could even dip a little bit more. But overall, like I said before, this could also fuel another squeeze to happen towards the end of the year as Tesla approaches the $400 price target. Elon Musk is also a lot richer. We're seeing a lot of headlines coming out about how he has amassed about $198 billion in his net worth, once again, because of how Tesla is moving. Now, think what you want about Elon Musk. That's your choice, of course, but just know that his contributions to society are very, very important with the team that he has helped create, the team that he has built with Tesla and SpaceX. And I just want to give him recognition where it's due. So I just wish the best for him and his children and everyone else that's involved. With his wealth, he's going to continue to make a lot of wealth. I think he's going to become a trillionaire one day with how much Tesla is going to increase as long as he holds on to his shares. And I just want to call it out that, yeah, he's going to get a lot of criticism for it. But at the end of the day, he's still doing very, very well with all this that's going on. On top of this, I want to say that Tesla had about 152 million in volume. That is a little bit below what we saw yesterday. So volume is now starting to slow down for Tesla. That's part of why it's starting to decrease. And that's what's due to happen because when you run so much, you are due to see little decreases here and there. And now in terms of our ratings, Wedbush gave Tesla an outperform rating. Bank of America Securities gave Tesla a buy rating, and Piper Sandler is saying Tesla is going to outperform the market. Right now, the majority of analysts are bullish. The price-price ratio is very elevated as Tesla's been outperforming the market like crazy. It is due to kind of cool off a bit when we see this big ratio like this. That's why Tesla did slow down a bit, and it could slow down a little bit more. But then I do believe, like I said before, it will eventually bounce as we get closer to December. Now, on top of this, just know that historically, Wednesdays tend to be green about 48% of the time. And we tend to see more volatility around 11 o'clock a.m. and also at 1 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. That's when you tend to see the most volatility for Tesla. Just keep that in mind. Besides that, we've been seeing a lot of sell ratings, a lot of sell orders in terms of our insider trades, at least right before the election. And then since then, we've been seeing very, very mixed stuff. So lots of shorting while simultaneously a lot of people are buying up Tesla. Now the question is, what's happening to Tesla? Why is tomorrow going to be so big for the share price? Now I want to focus on the broader markets and CPI, then I'll talk about the charts in just a few minutes. So just know this, as far as the way the market's moving, we basically have a new development right here. We're seeing tech starting to catch up. We saw Nvda bounce, Apple's flat, Microsoft, and the overall market is still flat in terms of tech. However, the other sectors like finance, consumer durables, and many others like health are now in the red. So the market's kind of switching. Yesterday, finance was leading and tech was a little bit down. Now today, it's tech that's back up, and now the other sectors are slowing. So the market is slowing down. Only a few tech stocks are what's holding things up. But why tomorrow is going to be important is because of this. Tomorrow is going to be Wednesday, November 13th, 2024. 1 hour before the market opens, we have the notorious CPI report coming out. CPI is big, guys. It could cause a big move in the markets, which in turn could affect Tesla. We're expecting core CPI month over month to be around 0.3%. That's most likely what we're going to get, as the last report was very close to that. Core year over year is expected to be at 3.3%, the same as before. So we're expecting core CPI to be the same year over year and month over month. For all items CPI month over month, we're expecting 0.2% the same. But year over year for all items CPI, we're expecting 2.6%, a slight increase. So we're expecting a slight increase in inflation besides core being about the same. Looking at our data, just noticed that as far as gas prices went, we did see them kind of go up just a tiny bit during the month of October before they start to dip again. And then this also affects crude futures, which tends to be correlated with CPI. So they tend to move very, very similar to one another. So with that slight increase in energy, it is technically possible we get a slight increase in all items CPI. But besides that, everything else should be okay looking at what the data suggests. Jerome Powell has said that he thinks that housing inflation was keeping the numbers up. If you exclude that, the numbers should be looking a lot better. Now, I know, guys, the data is not 100% credible. I don't trust every piece of data and how it's being reported, but I'm just saying that we have to go based off what the data is telling us. So I always repeat this just to make it very clear. Right now, the market's also indecisive. There's almost a 50-50 chance of us either seeing the Fed keeping rates the same or possibly giving us one more cut for the end of the year, the last FOMC meeting. We'll have to see about that. This may be adjusted depending on what they end up announcing. On top of this, when it comes to earnings, just real quick, we had Shopify, Home Depot, and a few others announce earnings. Shopify did very, very well beating on earnings. The share price is up quite a bit. We saw a nice amount of growth overall with their EPS at about 64 cents above expectations, with their net income at $344 million, which is nice growth. Good volume growth, good increase in their outlook, very, very bullish news. And I think it's the 9th consecutive quarter of them beating on revenue. SoundHound, however, actually, the share price is down just a little bit. The revenue is at about $25.1 million. That's a nice increase. Good growth in terms of their EPS. Their loss per share was actually very close to expectations. Not too bad. But for the most part, it wasn't really enough to wow investors. I think the share price is still down despite that, but the earnings were so-so. Anyways, let's talk about the share prices. So what do I see for Tesla in the broader markets from this point on? Well, Tesla saw this huge pump all the way up to about 363, so very close to this resistance. We were talking about how the 360s could be coming in my video yesterday. And then Tesla got a rejection, a big rejection after that. There wasn't really much negative news that came out, but it was due to slowdown after we got this big move. So the first thing with mentioning is the fact that Tesla's on a bit of a downtrend right over here, but you could attempt to draw out a wedge here. It is possible there's like a little wedge forming, which could signify there could be an attempt to bounce going into tomorrow, maybe. But that depends on CPI data, of course. But there's no sign of it breaking out of this wedge or not, at least for the time being. So Tesla has support at 327. That's going to be our 1 hour 50 EMA right over here, the yellow line you see, the 327 area. If we lose this, if Tesla fails to hold that, this could easily go down to the low of the day around the 323 area. And if that fails us, we go all the way down to about, I would say closer to 315-ish. The 315 area is coming next. If that were to fail us, then we have two more supports, one at 308, and then the notorious 300 for Tesla. If 300 fails us, Tesla goes all the way down into like the 289 area. And then below that, we have this previous resistance becoming support at 272. So those are your levels to watch for in terms of supports. For resistance, we have our 0.236 fib area around the 333 to 336 zone. That's also very close to our 20 EMA. So 333 to 336 is going to be our resistance zone. If we break through that, we're looking for an attempt to get back up into the 340 plus area. So what's Tesla going to do? Do we rally above 340 or do we end up dumping all the way down closer to about like the 320 area or below that? Well, honestly, guys, we are technically a little bit more bearish. As we had a high here, we came down, made a lower high, and we could be forming a falling wedge, which may lead to a big bounce later on, but there's no sign of a breakout quite yet, so we can't turn too bullish quite yet. This is going to depend on CPI data, so Tesla's either going to gap up and start pushing above 340, or we're about to see a rug pull all the way back down closer to 310. I wish that I was some kind of genie or fortune teller. I could give you guys all the answers, but I don't know what CPI is going to look like. If we get a hot CPI and the CPI is not too good, if it's a little bit above expectations, and the main thing for CPI is going to be all items. If all items year over year is a little bit hot, this one right here, this could be bearish for the markets, and the Tesla could start dipping back down to 310. If we get a decent CPI and everything's aligned with expectations, we could try to bounce. So it all depends. My gut tells me that the market's actually, it kind of dipped a bit only to start rebounding towards the end of the day because of the way we're viewing CPI. So we do look a little bit more bearish for Tesla. If I were to look at this from a technical standpoint, we could dip a little bit more. And then maybe whether it's CPI or some other factor, there could be a bounce coming back up to about the 340 area because of this wedge. So that's what I presume to be the most likely case. We continue to dip a little bit early on tomorrow, and then maybe we get a bounce after CPI, maybe, but it depends on the numbers. So I don't know for sure, but that's what I presume is the most likely case looking at the falling wedge. We will see depending on how CPI ends up going, so just keep that in mind. Once again, guys, I do typically give you guys a very, very more objective prediction, but in this case, it depends on the data. Now, as far as SPY is going, let me just call out the fact that SPY is forming a nice flag right over here, which typically does lead to more downside. And that's why I think that there could be more downside for Tesla as we approach like the 320 area. As SPY might follow the same trend. So if we're bullish on SPY tomorrow after CPI, you want to break past 598 and then start pushing back up to about that 600 area. If we're bearish, you want to see it essentially reject off this resistance up here, maintain destruction, maybe make its way all the way down towards the lows of the day. 594 will be retested. And if that fails us, we dip all the way down to where this trend line is, taking us down towards 592 or below. So could go either way. Just know this, when we look at the daily time frame, the daily is a little bit weaker on Tesla, so there's going to be a risk of this potentially slowing down. Same thing can be said about the 4-hour as it's continuing to slow. So I presume the most likely case for SPY is the same thing as Tesla. We're going to likely see a slowdown. This is looking a little bit weaker when you look at the bigger time frames, especially as we have these structures developing. And there is a risk of this dipping lower looking at technicals back down to 594 or lower. Now, I could be wrong because it depends on CPI. I can't predict that, guys, but just know technicals do suggest a little bit more downsides coming. Same thing with ES, right? We had a high here, came down, made a lower high, came down, made a lower high, came down. This does suggest downside as we're looking more distributive, and this also resembles like a head and shoulders. So this suggests we might be dipping back down below 6,000. It does look a little bit more probable as the market was very heavy and it pumps so much and is due for more downside. So we'll see how things end up going. I think this is the first red day we've seen on ES and many of these other ETFs. So there's a good chance we dip below 6,000 tomorrow and start dipping down to about 5,980. But it depends on CPI, of course. I don't know for sure, but it does look a little bit more bearish, technically speaking. As far as Nvda goes, we're trying to hold up, but here's the problem with Nvidia. We have a very tough resistance around that 150 area, and we need a good CPI in order for this to break out. So if we get a good CPI, this is going to be pushing for 152 quite easily to try to break all-time highs. If we don't get a good CPI, this could be dipping back down to 145.93, which if we fail, we go back down to 142, which is where the 50 EMA happens to be. Nvidia actually looks a little bit more bullish technically, so this might actually try to push higher, and that could fuel a little bit of a bounce. So that looks a little bit more probable to me. It tries to push up for 150 plus, but we'll see depending on CPI. For Bitcoin, I think that what's happening to Bitcoin is we're going to be forming a nice range right over here. We pumped up to about the 90,000 area, and our main support is now around that 86,500 to 87,000 area as well. So it's going back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. It's going to likely continue to do this. Look for a dip tomorrow morning before CPI back down to about 86,800 or so. And then we'll see, does CPI launch this into the 90,000s or do we get a dip back down to about below 84,000? It depends on CPI. We're just waiting for that. For others out there, we also happen to have NQ. NQ is now kind of flat right here. There's a possible head and shoulders developing right here. If we lose 21,130, this is going to be dipping to the lows from the day to about 21,000 flat, followed by basically 20,940, like all the way down here is the next support. If we're bullish, you want to break past 21,250. If that breaks, we're going to be pushing even higher. With this head and shoulders like structure, there is a chance that this might dip a little bit lower. That's what technicals are suggesting, despite the fact that Nvidia is showing some strength. This does look a little bit more bearish, technically speaking, but technicals are not everything, so it depends on CPI, so keep that in mind. So we'll see how it goes, even though the odds do favor downside a little bit more. The QQQ looks a little bit more bearish here because of this head and shoulders as well. Now, if we hold 510, we could test 510 in the morning. If this holds, we could bounce back up to all-time highs. If we lose 510, we're looking for a dip back down towards the imbalance at 507, not to mention the gap fill back down to 505. That range is going to be coming back up next. So what's going to happen? We have a head and shoulders. The QQQ does favor downside a little bit more. So we'll just have to see how things end up going. But just know there is that risk of downside looking at the current technicals. Apple is kind of flat here. So here's the thing about Apple. it loves to trade sideways. It loves to hold 220, but it also loves to reject very close to not only 230, but also like 235. So in this case, what's happening to Apple is we got a rejection off this high at 235, came down at a lower high. Now we're rejecting. So this is technically a little bit more bearish. We need to break past 225, then 226.2 to turn back up. If we reject, we're going to be dipping back down for 223. The odds are favoring us dipping back down for 223, if not 221.6. So it does favor downside for the 223 area. But depends on CPI, of course. I'm just calling out what technicals are suggesting. We said that Netflix is bullish, especially approaching the Jake Paul versus Mike Tyson fight. So I think this remains a little bit more bullish. We could be attempting to go up for about 825, but we'll see if CPI helps us launch or not. If we lose support right here at 817, we dip all the way back down to 811. We'll see which way we end up going, but as of right now, just know that Netflix remains more bullish, so give this some more time to develop. For other factors out there, we have CELH or Celsius trying to rebound. This looks like it might be trying to go back up to about 27.62. We'll see if that ends up being the case or not. If we end up losing support at 26.5, we're looking for a dip back down closer to about the 26 area, but it does look like it wants to push a little bit higher for 26.7. So overall, it does look a little bit more bullish. Keep that in mind. It might try to push higher. We'll see what CPI causes nonetheless. Palantir is trading flat right now. We have tough resistance at 60 and 62. To get back up to those highs, we need a decent CPI and a good reaction. If we get a negative reaction, we make a lower high here. This could reject and start tipping back down for 58. We're stuck in the middle. Reject off 60, we go back down to 58, and break past 60, we go up to 62. It could go either way, so we'll see which way it ends up going. From a technical standpoint, it does look like it wants to push closer to a little bit above 60, so like 61 or so, like right over here, might be coming. So I do anticipate a little bit more upside is the most likely possibility, and maybe a lower high if it does get that rejection, but we'll see about that. It depends on CPI, of course. For Supermicro, we look a little bit more bearish. It is rejecting. It tried to rebound only to reject, but we're kind of sandwiched now. We like to bounce off 20, and we like to reject off 27. Notice how we're going back and forth, so look for a dip back down to 20. We'll see if we get a bounce back up to 24. Otherwise, we're just completely range bound. Rivian is looking a little bit more bullish. We did call this out yesterday. It was looking bullish to me. If we hold above 11.2, we're looking for an attempt to get back up to 12. If we lose 11.2, we dip back down. I called that out yesterday, and today we broke past 11.2. So I think that this could be on its way up to this 12 resistance, very close to 11.8 to 12 as the most likely possibility. Yes, it depends on CPI, so we'll see what CPI causes, but just know the odds and technicals do favor upside. SoFi is kind of flat now, so we hit this tough resistance. We weren't able to crack past 15. I was hoping we would see 15 before trying to reject, but instead we came just short of that. So now it's looking a little bit weaker. It is due to pull back just a little bit. If we hold above 14, we're looking for a target of basically 14.3. If we don't hold above 14, we're looking for a dip back down for 13.5, followed by 12.98. My gut tells me it might be dipping back down towards the 13 area, and we'll see if we get a bounce or not off of that. It does look a little bit bearish, technically speaking, but we'll see what happens with CPI. For the IWM Russell 2000, I said yesterday that if it loses 240, we dip back down to 238. That's exactly what happened. We're looking for 236 as our support. We're going to test this tomorrow, most likely. And then if we get a good CPI, we bounce off that back up to 240. If it loses 236, this is going to be dipping closer to about 233. There's going to be a dip coming, so just be very wary of that. It depends on CPI, of course, but that is what's starting to show. It is looking a little dippy to me. AMD is looking a little bit weaker because of the fact that we are making lower highs. So what I mean is we had a high here, came down, made a lower high, came down, made a lower high, came down. So if you want to turn bullish, you want to get back above 145.9 and 148. Break past both of those and we push back up to 153. If it rejects and starts dipping, we're looking for a move back down to 140, followed by these imbalances below around 137.5. So overall, this is a little bit more bearish looking to me. It might push tomorrow morning before it starts to sink. That's the most likely technical move back down to 140 before it tries to bounce again. So a little bit more downside and a bounce is the most likely possibility. Now, this could be very depending on CPI. If we get a good CPI, we could get a bigger bounce instead. But we'll see. But technicals do suggest a little bit more downside. ARM is also making like a nice range right here. We need to get back above 144.4 to turn back up. And if we end up losing support, we're looking for 136 as our main support area. My gut tells me that ARM might dip a little bit more back down to 136 before it tries to bounce. So give this more time to develop. For coin, we are looking a little bit more bearish because of the fact that Bitcoin is slowing as well. We pumped like crazy, guys. This thing pumped like crazy, so it is due to pull back a little bit. We'll see if we get back above 320. If we hold above 320, we're looking for 330 as our targets. And if we end up losing the low right over here at 308, we're looking for a potential retest of 300, followed by about 280. So there might be a dip to 300 as the most likely possibility, but we'll see depending on the data. For Amazon, we look a little bit more bullish. We're going to be looking for a retest of 210 as we're holding our 20 EMA. Look for a push for 210. We'll see if we reject again or not because it is a tough resistance. So the 210s could be coming. If we reject off that, we go back down to 206. If we break past that, we're going to be looking for a breakout depending on CPI. Meta is looking more bullish. It held support nicely. If we lose 579, we dip all the way down to the imbalance at 573. As long as we're above 582, we do favor upside for at least 590. The chart does favor that it wants to push up to 590. So keep that in mind. We'll see what happens depending on CPI. Microsoft looks more bullish, trying to go up to about 426. It does favor upside as well. Google also looks more bullish, favoring 186. It has a nice cup and handle, so it does favor 186 plus. Unless we lose 180 and turn back down, but that depends on CPI. GameStop was trying to break out. It failed to hold above 28. It pushed a little bit more only to reject. So it might retest 25. We'll see if we bounce off 25 or not, depending on CPI. AMC is trying to break out. Now it's just trading sideways. Might retest 4.5 before it sees a big reaction. TJT is also starting to dip. We're looking for 28.9 to be retested. Might dip to the 28s and 26s, depending on CPI. The VIX is also looking a little bit more bearish. We'll see if this gets a bounce or not. This is forming a divergence, so this does tend to look for upside. We'll see if we get that move depending on CPI. We'll see what happens with the 10-year. That's also kind of flat right now. It's still looking bullish, so that could be a bearish signal. The dollar has been pumping, which tends to be bearish for the markets, but that has not been affecting it historically, or at least it's not affecting it how it typically does historically. So that's why it's a little bit different. That's why I'm not as worried about the dollar, but it still looks like it might dip a little bit. So as far as Tesla goes, we look a little bit more bearish on the 4-hour. It does suggest a little bit more downside could be coming. It's about 320, if not 316. But then also know that there is that falling wedge-like structure that could lead to a big bounce afterwards. That's the most likely case for Tesla, a little bit more downside and a bounce. But once again, I don't know for sure. It depends on CPI, so we'll see what happens with the numbers. I will be back tomorrow to give you guys more updates on CPI. I'll talk about what's happening with the market tomorrow morning before the market opens. Until then, I just want to say I really appreciate you guys so much for listening, so please have a great day. I'll be back tomorrow before market open. Thank you for listening. Have a good day, night, or evening, wherever you guys are around the world, and peace out.